Governments lock their darkest files away, but sometimes the secrets escape. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're revealing the government secrets they never expected to leak. Number 10. In October of 1950, 11 people in the San Francisco Bay Area suddenly turned up at Stanford Hospital with severe urinary tract infections. When doctors tested their urine, they found something bizarre: a red-colored bacteria, later identified as Serratia marcescens. Outbreaks of this bacteria were so rare that the case was considered mysterious enough to be published in a medical journal. One patient, Edward Nevin, was recovering from prostate surgery. He didn't survive the infection, claiming his life. The other 10 patients eventually recovered and were discharged. At first, doctors suspected the outbreak had started inside of the hospital, but the truth was far more disturbing. It came from Operation Sea Spray, a military operation that had taken place just weeks earlier. In late September, the U.S. Navy released 2 types of bacteria into the air over San Francisco: Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigi. Then, they quietly watched what happened next. The Navy claimed this was to see what would happen if a major city was attacked with a bioweapon. Outside of the 11 people with infections, there were also reports that pneumonia cases spiked that year. No one has ever proven it was caused by Operation Sea Spray, but the possibility has never been ruled out. Operation Sea Spray changed the Bay Area forever by altering its microbiome. Serratia might not have killed thousands when it was first released, but it never went away. Over the decades, the bacteria has lingered in the soil and the water around San Francisco, causing occasional outbreaks. In 2001, there was a meningitis outbreak in the town of Walnut Creek, 25 miles east of San Francisco. A local pharmacy's supply of spinal injections were contaminated with Serratia bacteria. 3 people died and 10 were hospitalized. Then in 2004, Emeryville-based biotech firm Chiron Corp had to throw out an entire batch of flu vaccines which had been contaminated. Before Operation Sea Spray was disclosed in 1977, this experiment was a closely guarded secret. In 1981, Edward Nevin's family sued the government for negligence. But stories like this would never even go public if our next clandestine government operation actually succeeded. Number 9. Carl Bernstein is most famous for being one half of the team who broke the infamous Watergate scandal. But most people don't know that in 1977, he dropped another crazy truth bomb about government secrets. In a Rolling Stone article, he wrote that hundreds of American journalists were in the CIA's pocket as part of something called Operation Mockingbird. Not to be confused with Project Mockingbird, where the U.S. government tapped journalists' phones in the 1960s. Bernstein reported that the project began during World War II when journalists forged close ties with the OSS. By the Cold War, those ties had only deepened. The CIA began using reporters as assets, sending them across Western Europe to gather intelligence under the guise of journalism. Then, in the 1960s, the program spread to South America. Journalists would collect information on foreign leaders and political movements in exchange for exclusive stories about CIA operations. As with most things during the Cold War, this was intended as a way of protecting American interests against the threat of communism. There were only around 100 journalists on the CIA's payroll. By 1976, the agency announced it was cutting those ties, promising it would no longer maintain any paid or contractual relationship with accredited U.S. reporters. Even though Bernstein only ever discussed journalists working with the CIA in other countries, but today some believe a version of Project Mockingbird is still alive inside the U.S., with claims that the agency bribes reporters to push propaganda. Whether true or not, the idea continues to fuel conspiracy theories. But that's not the only way that American government agencies have planned to disrupt the operations of foreign systems. Number 8. The Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, was the precursor to the CIA and mainly operated during World War II. In 1944, the OSS issued a document called the Simple Sabotage Field Manual. The aim was to help turn the people of Nazi-occupied Europe into citizen saboteurs. In the guide, the OSS recommended small acts of rebellion that were either impossible to pin to one person or easy to play off as accidents. It offered specific instructions on how fires may accidentally be started in occupying Nazi barracks. The manual also suggested that mechanics working on Nazi vehicles keep their tools dull and dirty to increase the likelihood of those vehicles breaking down later. Meanwhile, people in administrative positions were told to do their jobs as slowly as possible and find as many ways to mishear direct instructions as they could. Even in everyday life, The manual encouraged ordinary citizens to disrupt occupiers. Giving Nazis wrong directions or phoning their offices just to say, "Sorry, wrong number," were all considered acts of resistance. The guide was declassified by the CIA in 2008, and it's available to read on the CIA website if you're interested in learning more. And if you need us, we'll be headed to the deep ocean for our next revealed government secret. Number 7. In February of 1968, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine called the K-129 missed its designated check-ins and went radio silent. The ship was declared missing in March of that year. The U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence closely tracked Soviet activity in the Pacific. When Russian vessels suddenly began acting strangely, analysts took notice. They concluded that a ship and the others were desperately searching for it. The Soviets were unable to locate the missing K-129 even after weeks of searching. But the U.S. Navy was able to figure out what had happened by looking at recordings from the SOSUS hydrophone array. Around the time the sub had gone missing, the hydrophones picked up a distinctive low-frequency signature that suggested the K-129 had imploded. Using acoustic recordings, the Navy pinpointed the wreck's location and sent the USS Halibut from Pearl Harbor to investigate. And so, Project Azorian was born. Using remote-controlled underwater cameras, they photographed the submarine on the ocean floor, and they discovered at least one of its nuclear missiles was still intact. So in 1970, Defense Secretary Melvin Laird and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger made a clandestine proposal. What better way to study exactly what the Russians were up to than by lifting the wreck of the K-129 and studying it? President Richard Nixon accepted the idea and put the CIA on the case. To raise the wreck, the CIA commissioned a special ship, the Hughes Glomar Explorer. On paper, it was a brainchild of billionaire Howard Hughes, who lent his name to a cover story claiming the vessel was built to mine the ocean floor for manganese. In reality, it was designed for one of the most ambitious covert operations of the Cold War. The Hughes Glomar Explorer was armed with a series of mechanical claws designed to lift the K-129. While it sounds simple in theory, it ended up being extremely difficult. The claw apparatus suffered a catastrophic failure part of the way through the mission, resulting in 2/3 of the ship sinking back down to the ocean floor. In the end, only a 38-foot section of the sub was salvaged. But it wasn't a total washout. The raised section included 6 crewmen, 2 nuclear torpedoes, and the ship's bell, which was returned to the Soviets as a diplomatic gesture. All in all, Project Azorian cost the equivalent of $5.1 billion in today's money. But we can think of an even more embarrassing revelation for the U.S. government. Number 6. In June 1967, 12 years into the Vietnam War, Robert McNamara, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, started the Vietnam Study Task Force. The group was made in order to provide an accurate and exhaustive study of American operations in Vietnam. Despite the Department of Defense employing historians specifically for projects like this, McNamara went outside of official channels. 36 analysts, both from within the Pentagon and civilians, worked under tight security to complete their research. The result was a top-secret report that was over 7,000 pages long. Organized into 40 separate volumes, collectively, they were known as the Pentagon Papers. Though it was completed while Lyndon B. Johnson was in office, it was nearing the end of his term and he likely never set eyes on the report. Among the handful of people cleared to read the papers was Daniel Ellsberg, an analyst at the Rand Corporation, a think tank tied to the U.S. government that advises the Department of Defense. As U.S. casualties continued to mount, the Vietnam War grew less and less popular with the general public. Even people working with the government were starting to realize the war was failing, including Ellsberg. In 1971, Ellsberg secretly passed sections of the Pentagon Papers to New York Times reporter Neil Sheehan. Soon after, the Times published Sheehan's explosive exposé. The story revealed the shocking truth. The U.S. government had been concealing the true scale of the Vietnam War and conducting raids that the mainstream media wasn't aware of. It also showed that America had been involved in Vietnam long before the war even started. The American military had supported French colonial forces in the 1940s and covertly trained South Vietnamese soldiers. It demonstrated that the Johnson administration had systematically lied to not only the public but to Congress. Ellsberg was initially charged with conspiracy and espionage, but the charges were dismissed, and the damage to public opinion on the Vietnam War had been done. Years later, Robert McNamara admitted he believed Vietnam was doomed to fail. He said the Vietnam Study Task Force was meant to serve as a record, a way for future generations to understand how and why the war went so wrong. And it might still be a less embarrassing government failure than this next one. Number 5. The Stargate project was a Defense Intelligence Agency program that was set to explore whether psychic powers could give the U.S. an edge in the Cold War. And at the time, this wasn't treated as satire, it was a serious government effort, backed by real funding and real spies. Stargate had three main goals. First, to test whether remote viewing could be used to gather intelligence on foreign targets. Second, to figure out if rival nations were developing the same abilities and using them against the U.S. And third, to run lab experiments aimed at improving psychic performance for real-world intelligence work. So, what powers were they chasing? Remote viewing, yes, but also telekinesis, pyrokinesis, or starting fires with your mind, even the supposed ability to kill with concentrated thought. All of it fell under the Stargate project's umbrella, as the CIA studied self-proclaimed psychic prodigies like spoonbender Uri Geller and eccentric visionary Ingo Swann. All of this was for one reason: a video of a Russian girl performing feats of psychic power that were actually just special effects and camera trickery. But if there was any risk that the Russians had found a way to harness psychic powers, then the US needed to pour considerable resources into making sure they could do the same. This top-secret project was shut down in 1995. It had proven definitively that no good came of any psychic research on the US taxpayers' dime. It now exists as a little more than an embarrassing cautionary tale of irresponsible military spending. We can think of someone much more lucrative to have on the payroll than Uri Geller. Number 4. Walter Elias Disney was many things. The founder of the Walt Disney Company and the creator of one of the most enduring brands in American entertainment history. He was also an animator, a marketer, a theme park owner, and an American icon. Oh yeah, and an FBI informant. Disney was very much a capitalist eager to see anyone who didn't share his views prosecuted and chased out of the entertainment industry. That's why he developed a close working relationship with J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. He would eagerly snitch on any communist agitators he claimed to have spotted in the industry. Not only did Disney help the FBI root out left-wing thought in Hollywood and bust up unions, he also allowed Hoover to dictate creative decisions in some of his films. That way, they were always marching in lockstep with the FBI's ideological stance. Disney was such a devoted bootlicker for the Bureau that in 1954 he was given the title of Special Agent in Charge Contact. He was also given the rare privilege of being permitted to film inside FBI offices, which was a lot rarer than it is now. Disney kept most of the deals with the Bureau quiet, but when he needed political muscle, he wasn't shy about using them, like the bitter studio strike of 1941. He also ruined the lives of several animators by recommending them to the House Un-American Activities Committee run by the notorious Senator Joseph McCarthy. Like his secret reports to the FBI, which were revealed to the public in the 1990s, decades after his death, Disney knew how to weaponize the government's paranoia to crush his rivals. But there was one enemy of the government that they just couldn't seem to squash. But it wasn't for lack of trying. Number 3. The CIA tried to kill Fidel Castro 634 times, and every single one of them failed. Castro was the leader of Communist Cuba, which brought a lot of people together in wanting him dead, including the Mafia, Cuban dissidents, and the CIA. So everyone put their heads together and came up with an obscene number of ways to take Castro out. When the normal conventional ways failed, they turned to the bizarre. They spiked a bunch of cigars with the botulinum toxin, hoping that would send the tobacco-loving dictator to his grave. But the cigars were somehow lost and never reached Castro. To this day, no one knows what happened to them. Someone floated the idea of hiding a bomb inside a painted seashell that they hoped would attract Castro's attention and lure him to his death. And if the shell didn't get him, maybe his diving suit would, which the CIA planned to fill with a fungus that would give him a debilitating skin disease. They also tried to hide a deadly syringe full of poison in a pen that could be used to inject Castro, assuming one of their assassins could get close enough. Not every plan was meant to kill Castro, some were just designed to humiliate him. One idea was to use radioactive isotopes to make his iconic beard fall out. Another involved pumping psychedelic gas into a recording booth while he delivered a national radio address. His speech would become incoherent and make the leader seem insane. Speaking of weapons, we can think of a much stranger one than anything the US tried to deploy against Fidel Castro. Number 2. We've seen exploding cigars, urinary tract infecting biological weapons, and futile attempts to create psychic super soldiers. But none of those weapons are quite as baffling as the gay bomb. That was the informal nickname for the government's plan to create a chemical aphrodisiac that would make enemy soldiers so gay and horny that they would be too distracted to be combat effective. The US Air Force was really working on this as recently as 1994. If funded, the project would have cost $7.5 million. Naturally, it didn't get to that stage and would instead be leaked to the public, where it received a lot of deserved ridicule. While the gay bomb is undeniably moronic and embarrassing, it is not nearly as paranoia-inducing as our next ultimate leaked secret. Number 1. The US government's obsession with crushing communism in Cuba brought out some of its darkest ideas. The lowest point was Operation Northwoods. In the early 1960s, the Department of Defense proposed staging false flag terrorist attacks on American soil, all to sway public opinion and justify a war with Cuba. One member of the military suggested blowing up a US ship in Guantanamo Bay, then blaming Cuba, publishing a list of casualties in newspapers, which would help create a wave of national indignation. These plans got frighteningly far, even ending up on the desk of JFK, who rejected the plan before it dwelled in obscurity for 40 years. And it leaves us with a frightening question. If the US government considered it once, what would stop them from trying it again? Leaked government secrets are shocking enough, but declassified files reveal even more. Watch 50 real declassified FBI secrets to see what they never wanted you to know. Or click on this video instead.